Mic check 1 2, it's the Y2K collector. So they finally did it. They're bringing all of my favorite childhood arcade fighting games to one Nintendo Switch cartridge. It appears that Capcom is going to be releasing Marvel vs. Capcom, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, and Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, along with the Punisher on one cartridge, or basically like a collection, the Marvel vs. Capcom collection, and it's going to be released on the Nintendo Switch. So I knew that this was eventually going to come to fruition. I didn't know how long it was going to take for it to happen, but I knew eventually it was going to happen. And I have 2 points that I want to share on this, really 3. And the first is really to answer a question that I got from a commenter on my channel. And I can't remember exactly, but I think they asked me something to the effect of what I thought the porting of these Capcom games to the Nintendo Switch is going to mean for the value of these games. So I want to kind of speak to that. I also kind of want to speak to the Nintendo Switch in general, in terms of just how it's becoming the one-stop shop for all games ever created. and then I want to talk about the different gameplay experiences, and just the nostalgia factor. So first I'll talk about value and price, because I think that's something that a lot of people are going to think about first. Now, do I think that Nintendo releasing these games on the Switch on one cartridge is going to affect the price of these games? No, I do not think so. I do not think that just because Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is now available on the Switch, that the original games are going to somehow now be cut in half, or the value is going to go down. If anything, you might see the value for some of these games go up. The reason why I say that is because I look at certain games. I look at games like the Metal Slug games. I look at games like, Contra. I look at different games that have been re-released on the Switch. When you start to think about games like Xenocrisis and things like that, I think that, when you look at some of these games, the originals haven't been destroyed from a value perspective. The originals are still quite pricey, and their overall value hasn't been impacted that greatly. I think that this genre of fighting game, or fighting games, is something that I don't know how many young people are really going to be excited about. Like, I don't know how many 12, 10, 13-year-olds are going to be excited about this collection of fighting games, because a lot of the 10, 12, 13, even 14 and 15-year-olds, they're kind of beyond this type of fighting game. They're more into the Fortnite, they're more into the Call of Duty, they're more into like those types of games, because that's what this current generation, I think, is more focused on. I think a collection of games like this really caters to the millennial and older, and I think that's really who this collection is for. And I think it's awesome, because now you're able to battle people online. So that's just amazing, right? You can battle whoever you want. I think it's going to be interesting because many of us who grew up playing these games, we played these games on Dreamcast controllers, we played these games on PlayStation 2 controllers, on PlayStation 1 controllers, on Sega Saturn controllers. And I don't know if there is a controller that works with the Switch that mimics or has any of the feels of those controllers, right? So you're gonna have to really kind of learn how to play these games on a more modern controller, which I'm sure people will learn, but it's not gonna be the same as playing Capcom 2 on a Dreamcast controller on a PlayStation 2 controller. It's just going to be a completely different feel. So we'll have to see how that goes. On top of that, and I guess this will lead me into my next point, just the nostalgia factor, right? We've already been given like Capcom collections already, right? Like, we've already been given the belt action collection with all of the, more popular Capcom beat 'em ups like Knights in the Round, King of Dragons, and things like that. And while yes, it was that collection was exciting when it first came out, I don't think it's something that people talk about every day because it's very niche. On top of that, you haven't really seen the impact of those Super Nintendo games. Like, King of Dragons is still an expensive game. It's still a $100 game. Knights of the Round is still a $100 to a $120 game. So despite those games being released on the Switch, I don't really think that there's been a ton of excitement or enough excitement around playing those games on the Switch for it to have any meaningful impact on their Super Nintendo counterparts or on the originals that came out on the original systems. And so I think you're going to see the same thing happen here. On top of that, we've also seen, the Capcom Fighting Collection, where we got Street Fighter 3 Double Impact and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike and Street Fighter Alpha, Street Fighter Alpha 2, Street Fighter Alpha 3, Red Earth. Like, we've already seen these types of, collection type games be released. And I don't really see them having that great of an impact. And again, just going back to the nostalgia, the reason being is that the generation that grew up playing these games, we know what these games are about. And if you're gonna play these games for nostalgia's sake, you're gonna want to play them, and this could just be me speaking, but you're gonna want to play these games in their original format. There's nothing like playing a Sega Saturn and listening to that classic Sega Saturn sound. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure that, Nintendo, when this is released on the Switch, they'll do a good job with the sound, but there's something very distinct about playing these games on the Sega Saturn. It has this, there's just, you can't duplicate it. It's like a very arcade sounding feel. And I don't want to say you can't duplicate it without having played the Nintendo Switch version, but I think it's just going to be hard to duplicate. I mean, we've seen Capcom re-release things. You've got the Mega Man X collection, the Capcom Fighting collection. You've got all these different collections, and I don't think that they really have the impact on the value of their originals, primarily due to nostalgia. Because my generation, that still plays video games and is still heavily into video games, there's a nostalgia factor that comes from having the original game that I don't think you're gonna get from having having it on the Switch. So I think it's cool. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a very convenient way to play these games, and I think, like, if you don't feel like pulling out your Dreamcast and hooking it up and getting Capcom 2 going, yeah, it'll be a great way for you to play the game quickly. But if you really want to get the feel of the game, you're going to want to play the original. Now, someone might say, "Oh, Y2K, that's bogus. No one's gonna care about that stuff. People, are gonna be happy with the Switch version." Well, I kind of compare it to record players. People still listen to records because there's a very distinct sound that comes from a record player. That's why people play records. You could listen to a lot of songs on CD or cassette, or you can stream them, but there's just something different. There's a different level of warmth that comes from playing a record on a record player. And it's just something you appreciate as you get older. So I kind of, and obviously these aren't records, but in the same way that you just appreciate certain things in their original format. No matter how many times it's remade or remixed or remastered, you still kind of want to enjoy it in its original form. Now, this is going to lead me to my last point on this topic. The Switch is the final destination for all video games, in my opinion, especially remakes. I feel like by the time 2030 comes, any meaningful, popular retro video game, regardless of the system it was released on, whether it was the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Saturn, Sega CD, anything pretty much Gen 6 and older, I feel like is going to get ported to the Switch, and the Switch will just be the easiest way to play it and experience it. And at that point, the Switch to me just feels like an emulator. That's really what it feels like. It feels like it's just becoming that one-stop shop place where you can just play ports of almost any game you want. And at that point, it's like, is it even fun anymore? What makes it different from just emulating it on, an off-brand emulation machine, or emulating it on a Steam Deck, or on any one of those devices that allows you to play or emulate or port games? I feel like that's what the Switch is being reduced to at this point. And I think that Nintendo is just smart about it because they're still selling you cartridges, right? So instead of you going and downloading the game and porting the game or emulating the game for free, Nintendo's like, well, you know what? If they're gonna port and emulate this stuff anyway, why don't we just put it on a cartridge and sell it? And then, I feel like they're just in a way making the Switch just like the perfect emulation machine. I could be wrong, but with almost every popular game, regardless of system, landing there, that's just how it feels. And even if the games that land there don't get a physical release, there's so many games on there. I mean, like, I'm a huge shoot 'em up fan, and I actually own a Neo Geo AES. But there's a ton of Neo Geo shoot 'em ups that I play on my Switch, including Blazing Star, Prehistoric Isles, the other one that I just got the other day, Polestar, right? So there's a number of games that I play on my Switch that are originally Neo Geo games, but it's just because it's easier to play on the Switch because you can just download it from the store. So I say all that to say that while yes, I think it's very cool that all of these games are heading to the Switch and they're going to land on the Switch, I think it's very exciting, and I'm happy. I'm happy that more people get to experience Marvel vs. Capcom 2 rather. I talk about it so much on my channel, so if you're a viewer of the channel and you never had a chance to play that game, I think it's exciting because now you'll get a chance to play it. But I don't think that it's going to have the impact on the originals like some people think. In fact, I don't think it's going to have any impact at all. I could be dead wrong. You guys can let me know your thoughts down in the comments, but I think that these physical copies, these games, hold a lot of meaning for the people who collect them beyond the game. If you played the game growing up, if you spent time in the arcade, if you plugged hours into it, and you are a collector of those games, it being available on the Switch just means that it's easier to access. And that's always great. That's always fun. No one's going to be mad at that. But in no way do I think that a Nintendo Switch release of these games is going to make these any less valuable. And I'll leave off on this. We already got a re-release of all of these games on the Arcade 1-Up. Now, of course, is someone going to pay $200 or $300 for an Arcade 1-Up to play these games? Heck no. Well, maybe if you're a die-hard fan of arcades, but no one's going to pay that. But people are going to pay the $30 that it costs to probably get the cartridge. So I am excited about it. I don't think that it's going to replace the originals. I think nostalgia, especially when it comes to retro games, nostalgia rules all. It still rules all. And I think that ultimately the Nintendo Switch is going to be the final destination of all games that are meaningful. Anything that's meaningful, it will find its way to the Switch, because that's just where everything's headed. And Nintendo's just being smart about it. They're just like, hey, put it on the Switch, put it on the Switch, port it to the Switch. And I think you're just going to see that happen with a lot of games. Let me know your thoughts. It's the Y2K Collector. Are you excited about this recent development? Let me know down in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next video. Take it easy.